basically tell the entrepreneur, hey, tell me what are the 5 guesses, right? The top 5 guesses that you have about your business, right? Tell me how much each guess is going to cost you. And the cost usually at the very early stages is not just about money, it's about time, because that's the biggest cost to the entrepreneur. They're investing their entire life into this thing. Tell me how much time is it going to take to validate each of these guesses, right? And then if you validate it, what does it mean for the business, right, in the future? So ideas matter, right? It's not just about execution. So just making sure that they are rational and how are they going to de-risk and de-guess the business, right? That really is the crux of what I do.
Hey everyone, this is Prashant and I'll be your host for the VC 10X podcast, and today we have Srivats Sivanandan with us. Srivats is an operator angel with a track record of improving organizational velocity. He's skilled at determining where to lay the train tracks, that is the direction, and works with XFN teams to ensure the trains run on time, which means on speed. In this episode, we talk about a Srivats story and how he started investing, his common sense approach to investing, how to build credibility as a new investor, the enthusiasm interview, and lots more. So without wasting any time, let's dive straight in. Oh wait, if you haven't subscribed to VC 10X yet, please do and give us a 5-star rating if you find value in this episode. Now, let's start. Hey Srivats, so good to have you on the VC 10X podcast. How are you doing?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm pretty good as well. To start things off, can we have your story and how you started investing?
Yeah, this question is always interesting and profound for me because every time someone asks me this, I try to go back to see what was the actual genesis of me getting interested in all things venture and angel investing. I want to say 2012 was really the starting point. And I was living in New York at the time. And Fred Wilson, who you may have heard of, who runs USV, writes a daily blog, a VC. It's just titled a VC. And so that really was my introduction to the world of venture capital and startups and private companies. And so it started there. And then from there, I think he blogged about Brad Feld once, who runs Foundry, and a book that Brad had written really kind of demystified venture capital. So I sort of read that book, and intellectual curiosity, right? And it just keeps taking you to the next step. And then, one thing led to the other. And then just randomly I connected with Gil Vincina, who was one of the earliest, I want to say, syndicate formers on AngelList. And so Gil had this kind of vibrant community of folks who were interested in angels and angel investing and didn't really know where to start, right? So we basically all just kind of got together and said, hey, you know what, Gil, we'll help you do some due diligence, right? We are all operators. We all work in different companies. I think I was at Amazon at this time. It was 2014, I want to say. And so we said, we'll just volunteer our time and help you due diligence companies, and and we'll go from there. So that I think was my first taste, right? At this time, I didn't have the cash, so I couldn't directly put money into startups just yet. But I got a good kind of the under the hood view of what it takes to evaluate companies. How do they make the decisions? What does it take to raise capital from limited partners if you're a VC? But yeah, that kind of is the genesis.
Got it. Yeah, like that initial stage of getting to know the insights of the VC space, which kind of like has some closed borders around it. You need to get in there to understand, right? So yeah. Great stuff. And let's talk about how you're investing right now. So what do you look for in companies while you're investing in them?
Yeah. I will say this, right? Like I think caveat everything I say with the fact that I think VCs and private company investing in general is an apprenticeship model, at least is my view, right? So one of the things that I've kind of realized over time is that there is no real kind of, truly unique angle. You're just building on the foundation laid by giants who came before you. So with that said, I think I have liberally kind of adopted techniques that I've heard from folks like Gokul Rajaram or Elizabeth Yen at Hustle Fund, Fred Wilson himself and Brad Feld. So specifically kind of what I look for has evolved over time, right? I've been angel investing very actively for 3 years now. When I started out, it was all about, do I know this founder really well? right? Like, do I see patterns here in this founder's traits that I can pattern match with stories of successful founders that I've heard in the past, right? That was my kind of solo lens. Over time, what I've learned is that it's not just about the founder. There's a little bit of weightage that you need to add to the market that they're trying to build a business in, the actual product that they're trying to build to win market share. And so those two started taking some precedence as well. And so fast forward to today, I'm generally a fintech B2B SaaS kind of an investor. So in both those kind of verticals, if you will, I've kind of leaned more towards, can the founder understand that it's not just about the product, but it is also about how do you distribute the product and get it into the hands of customers who are willing to pay for your product. And I know there's a lot there, right? But if you unpack it, I've noticed a lot of first-time founders. It's almost a cliche at this point where they take the famous YCism, right? Build something people want. They take it as a dogma, right? And that's one thing to people want it, but then I would just say build something people want, and that they will pay for it, right? So, and I think I've started to realize that combining those two is a good way to think about the health and the longevity of any business. So, I would say distribution is kind of really kind of where my head is at when I'm meeting founders today.
Got it. So are you angel investing through some syndicates, or are you doing in your own capacity?
Both. I'm active on some syndicates. I will say when I was newer, I did more syndicate investing. And then as I've sort of built my own presence in the ecosystem, I'm starting to get pitches, right? So now I've started to do a lot more direct as well.
Great. Awesome. Yeah. So you talked about the importance of founders, and you're also taking in consideration some other aspects, which are also very important. But what stage are you coming in at? Is it pre-seed or after revenue? At what stage?
Yeah, very biased and very active in the early stages, right? So typically, the companies that I directly invest in, the founders have an idea, they may have a website, but very unlikely that they have revenue. So definitely more pre-rev, pre-seed, seed. When I'm investing through syndicates, depending on what the syndicate is bringing to the table, I have made exceptions and gone up to a Series A or a B, but very rarely beyond that stage.
Got it. So basically, in the initial stage, as you know, the emphasis is not so much on numbers because there are not many numbers to see, right? At that stage, there's only one founders to see, and you only see the conviction, the insights they have in the industry, right? So what specific traits do you look for in founders that makes you say yes to a deal?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? Like, and I originally an engineer, so I tend to use my rational side of my brain a lot, which means numbers, right? And so it's a little bit of a cognitive shock to my brain that, oh man, I have to make a decision. I don't have any data to go off of. So in a lot of ways, like when I was starting out, it felt like I was just kind of spraying and praying, right? Like, oh, my intuition really drove it all. And honestly, I didn't really hone my intuition because I was used to making decisions with data, right? And then I kind of realized that sometimes you have to, to cultivate good judgment, right? You need kind of bad judgment. And then bad judgment comes from making some mistakes. So, like everybody, I had my fair share of mistakes as I started out investing. And then what it really kind of the point that it drove home for me was that I need to kind of write down what I learned from these mistakes, and then that helped inform the framework. And that framework essentially today, what it looks like is I'm meeting somebody pre-seed stage. What I really want to know is how are they thinking about sequencing the experiments that they need to get to the next milestone, right? So, and to add some more color there, it literally is I call it, for the lack of a better word, a guess plan, if you will, right? So I basically tell the entrepreneur, hey, tell me what are the 5 guesses, right? The top 5 guesses that you have about your business, right? Tell me how much each guess is going to cost you. And the cost usually at the very early stages is not just about money, it's about time, because that's the biggest cost to the entrepreneur. They're investing their entire life into this thing. Tell me how much time is it going to take to validate each of these guesses. right? And then if you validate it, what does it mean for the business, right, in the future? So this is more of a more qualitative thought exercise, right? Like, are they navigated the idea maze, right? To paraphrase Balaji Srinivasan's idea of like ideas matter, right? It's not just about execution. So just making sure that they are rational and how are they going to de-risk and de-guess the business, right? That really is the crux of what I do.
Yeah, I absolutely love that approach. The guess plan. And what are your guesses for it? Because you do make a lot of guesses when you're starting out a business. And as an investor, asking the entrepreneur that how much time is it going to for you to validate those guesses? Because I'm ready to believe you on that, but then how are you going to prove me right on that? Right?
Right.
Brilliant stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about some of your investments. So are there any companies that you'd like to mention on the podcast, or if you have any contrarian investment that you've made that you'd like to mention?
Hmm. Interesting question. Contrarian. I mean, I'll be honest, right? I think the contrarian word has been so overused in the venture industry that at this point, I think being contrarian is not contrarian.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's a lot of kind of post rationalization of investments where you just say, hey, I'm doing it just because I want to be contrarian, kind of thing. I don't know if I would say I am a contrarian investor. I think I'm more of a common sense type of an investor, right? Like
Right.
I want the business to be intuitively understood by, let's say, my dad, my grandma, or whoever, right? So I try to dumb it down to a level where a 5-year old, for example, would also get it. But
Right.
in the spirit of kind of talking about some of my portfolio companies. Um, I think I'm generally, like I said earlier, I'm excited about fintech and B2B SaaS. I recently invested in a company that they're not fully out of stealth yet, but I mentioned what they do. They're trying to really create a closed loop wallet as a service for small and medium businesses. So that is super exciting to me because, as we're all aware, kind of the Visa, Mastercard, and duopoly has really kind of been rent seeking for a long time now. So I think there's something to be said for closed loop wallet approaches, given all the advances we made in the rails, in the underlying rails. So that's something that I'm super excited about. Zeta, Ask Zeta is a company that is also supporting kind of financial planning and decision making for couples. So it's an interesting wedge into a market where, hey, can I create a bank account for couples versus just individuals? It just has the tailwind is inherent, right? Like there's things like you have two people, right, for the cost of one kind of CAC. So those are some companies that I'm super excited about. Yeah, I don't think I wouldn't say there's necessarily a look for contrarianism, but yeah, that's my two
Yeah.
cents.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, I don't get that answer often. That everyone wants to say that. Okay, I'm the contrarian out here. I'm believing in people. I'm taking the bets. Right. I love that common sense approach because that's not very common these days. Right. Yeah. So moving on, let's talk about research and due diligence. I know you're investing in a space that you're, I believe, familiar with, and so how do you conduct due diligence? How do you do your research?
This is a tricky one. My belief is that it's evolved over time, as with everything. But when I started out, I almost wanted to only stay within my circle of competence, right? Like I did not really venture outwards of what I knew or what I thought I knew. Um, Over time, what I've realized is that the more you know, you kind of feel the less you know. In a lot of ways, it's counterintuitive, but as I got deeper into the venture space, I realized that there's opportunities to invest in sectors that are totally orthogonal to my comfort zone, right? And so then the question becomes, well, how do I build conviction in a space that I have no idea about, right? Like, and that's where I think network matters. If you're part of a community, like I'm part of a community, the Hustle Fund community of Angel Squad, where we're a bunch of angel investors, operators, founders who are able to openly share ideas, exchange our thought process, and not necessarily outsource individual conviction, but at least help. get a different viewpoint on a particular company or a sector. So there's just a lot of sector specialists that you're able to tap into as you start doing this for longer, right? Like it is just impossible for one person to scale the breadth of knowledge that it takes to put money into private startups. And so leaning on that network is absolutely critical. And then secondarily, I would say one of the things that I've started to do recently is I have a ton of friends who have PhDs, right? So this is kind of a subset of the networking angle. But a lot of the PhD folks that I know, I've noticed, are at the frontier of some of the cutting edge research, right? They know they have a very academic brain, but they understand the technical underpinnings of a new technology, or they might have some insights that's not necessarily well known in the public sphere. One example of that is recently I was talking to a friend of mine who's researching into hardware kind of technology where you could augment human capabilities. So it's a little bit of Iron Man type of a thing, right? Like, could Iron Man become a reality for humans? Could we augment human capabilities? So now I'm starting to see, okay, if some entrepreneur out there is listening to this and is starting to, wanting to build a hardware startup that can commercialize this technology, right? Like, I'm interested, right? Like, because I know I have an expert that I can lean on to do some due diligence on the idea that the entrepreneur brings. So I would just say the network really matters, right? Especially for areas that you don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's a great approach because one person cannot be an expert in everything. So you have to get help. And if you have a network of people who have PhDs, then why not ask them for help? And why not ask them where's the next big innovation coming from, right? Great. So moving on, how much does timing of an investment matter? Has it ever happened to you that a proposal came to you and you were like, this is a good proposal, but I don't think the timing is right, something like that?
I see. I mean, to be honest with you, I think I'm still a pretty newish investor, right? If you think about the time scale, I've been doing it for about 3-ish years, and sometimes you're like, when deal flow comes to you, you don't have the luxury to say, hey, you know what, I'm not going to pull the trigger on this, come back to me later, right? Because that's just not the stage where I'm at. But I think there's another interesting angle here, like, hey, do I not invest in a company because I think it's too early, right? Like, for the marketplace. And that is always an interesting thought exercise. I think, again, it involves a lot of guesswork at the earliest stages. Right, like WebWAN failed in the late 90s, and now Instacart is a big deal, and AWS, Amazon Fresh, is a big deal. So yeah, that's a tricky one. I don't know if I've ever said no to someone who agreed to let me onto their cap table, right? Like, because the balance of power, at least the way I see it, is still on the entrepreneur side as far as I am concerned, because I'm still building out my track record, right? I think the other challenge here for early investors, especially in the public markets, is your feedback cycles are long, right? Like, I might have been investing for 3.5 years, but to really, get any sense of feedback on how I'm doing as an investor, I probably need to wait another 3-4 years. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And I have a follow-up question on that. Then how does a person as a new investor, like supposedly new investor, even though they have been for years in the space, right? So how do they prove their credibility as an investor in that case? Is there a way?
I love that question. I love this question. I think the number one thing I would say, if you're looking to get into investing in earnest, is to, it might sound like a cliche, but be helpful. Be helpful before you get these opportunities knocking on your door, right? Like, to give you an example, here's how I got into kind of the hustle fund orbit. Um, I'm fairly active on Twitter. Elizabeth Yin, who's a general partner, founder at Hustle Fund, is someone who I deeply admire and respect. And I basically just cold DM'd her on behalf of one of my portfolio companies at the time and said, "Hey, do you want to take a look? See if you like it. I want to hear your feedback on this." Long story short, she didn't like the company, but then I built a relationship, right? So I think. And then because I built a relationship, she thought of me when Hustle Fund was experimenting with this concept for creating an angel squad or a community of angel investors. I think you just have to put yourself out there, a little bit of just pure grit, just keep reaching out, right? Don't be afraid to get rejected by big names in the space. Because it just takes one yes, right? It's similar to the entrepreneur story, right? I tell a lot of founders, like, hey, as you're pitching VCs, you might have to go through 200 pitches before you get to your first yes, which might be your 201st investor pitch, right? But it's kind of the same thing, right? You have no network. Like, I don't come from any credential, like, Silicon Valley, Stanford network, or anything of that sort. So sometimes it's just be methodical and have grit and keep reaching out, and doors start opening.
Right, absolutely agree. That's a great approach for new investors for being a few years in the space. Besides, let's talk about value add. So, is there a way you're adding value to your portfolio, founders' portfolio companies?
Yeah, I don't claim to be their one-stop shop for any question that they may have. But what I do is, one, open up my network. If I have a bunch of folks who know things that I do not, I make introductions. I help them with one thing that I've started helping my portfolio with is interviewing. Just like this, hey, interview the candidate for like a, not from like a technical fit or like even a company culture fit, but interview the candidate for just enthusiasm, right? Like, I feel like that's something that companies kind of undersell, right? Like, you need people who are enthusiastic. If you have a bunch of people who are enthusiastic about what the company is doing, magic can happen, right? So I literally just tell the founder, hey, I will look for enthusiasm. That's my only job in these 30 minutes. And so that's helped us, get some really, you'd be surprised what candidates do, and they're really passionate and enthusiastic about the mission of the business, right? So that's something that I spend a lot of my time doing. And then the other thing I do is pitch deck feedback, which is kind of standard. Like, as they go out there to raise their seed round or Series A or whatever, I have they get my eyes on it. So feedback on that. Sometimes I help out a little bit more hands-on. Financial modeling is something that a lot of technical founders are not necessarily comfortable with, so I help with that. Outside of that, investors to VCs, right? Like, so VCs who invest at the next stages, right? Like, so get intros to them to the extent that I can. Yeah, those are some things that I do to help.
Great. Yep. And at what stage does the enthusiasm interview come in? Is it like the first step, or is it further down the line?
Yeah, no, I try to do this upper funnel, right? Like, before we bring and do the full loop, for example, right? Like, I try to do this early in the process, right after maybe an HR screen, right? Typically, if there is HR, or if there's someone who's kind of figuring out if there's a good culture fit, like if the culture fit conversation has happened, I want to talk about enthusiasm next. Like, hey, paint a picture about what this business means to you. Right, and then just let the candidate talk.
Right, brilliant. Like, I haven't heard anything like that before. Like, enthusiasm interviews, amazing. All right, so that's all for my main questions. Now let's move on to the exciting part, the rapid fire round. So in this, I'll ask you 5 quick questions about your investing, and you have to give 5 quick answers. Good?
Okay.
All right. So the first one goes: what are the sectors and regions you invest in?
Southeast Asia, US, India, fintech sector, B2B SaaS, future of work.
Got it. What stage you typically invest in?
Pre-seed, seed.
What's the typical check size?
I write up to 5 digits, so I've written very few checks that are 5 figures. Typically, my sweet spot is 4 digits.
Got it. Where can founders pitch you?
They can find me on Twitter. I'm pretty public. My DMs are open. I'm on LinkedIn. Yeah.
Got it. And last one, where can our listeners follow you?
Twitter is probably the best place because I amplify other investors, and I also share my own thinking there. My handle is at SREWATS on Twitter. And follow me there, and let's have a chat.
Got it. I'll make sure to plug all those links in the show notes below so that our listeners can get there easily. Thank you for coming on, Srivats. It was great talking to you, and happy investing.
Yes. Thanks, Prashant, for having me. This is great.
My pleasure.